Welcome to another edition of News Bites here on Daily World Television. My name is Kal Korff and I'm your host. At Vatican City in Rome, the Palestinian National Authority has opened up its first and new embassy. This is part of the Vatican's attempt to recognize the Palestinian National Authority as a separate entity and a state in waiting. The president of the Palestinian National Authority, Mahmoud Abbas, who is in the 10th year of his original 4-year term in office, has said that he is against Israel, of course, facilitating or encouraging the United States to move its embassy in Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. He said that he considers Jerusalem to be Muslim, to belong to a future state of Palestine, and that it is only to remain Palestinian. The Pope, who met with Abbas in Vatican City and helped open the embassy, has told Abbas that he considers Jerusalem to be an open international city that must remain accessible to all three Abrahamic religions. That includes Christianity, the original Judaism, of course, and even Islam. Abbas has demurred on that issue, preferring that it remain Islamic, but what he is steadfastly against is that Jerusalem ever become the recognized capital of Israel. Now, this is an interesting viewpoint because Abbas has history against him on this issue, as does anyone who says that Jerusalem is not what the Jews call it, the eternal capital of Israel. The fact is that Jerusalem became Israel's capital in the year 1000 BC. You can look it up in the history books, please do. That means that Jerusalem, as being the capital of Israel, means it's over 3,000 years old. Now, Israel used to be called the Kingdom of Judea. It was reborn as Israel after World War II and the Holocaust. The United Nations partitioned territory in what used to be the Kingdom of Judea, in a land called Palestine, a name that was made up and given to it by the Romans, not the Jews, after they occupied and conquered Israel and sent thousands of Jews as slaves to Rome. Later, in the 1900s, during World War II, and for several hundred years prior to that, the Ottoman Empire and various Muslim occupiers and invaders did occupy that area, but a lot of them were keen to leave it largely alone, and it was again dominated by Jews. If you listen to the rhetoric of Abbas, now this is a man who got his PhD where he went ahead and denied the Holocaust, that's how truthful he is. He has said that Jerusalem has always been Palestinian. That's not true. The fact is, what are called Palestinians today are a modern day myth. There is no Palestinian language. It does not exist. There is no Palestinian ancient coinage. It does not exist. There's no Palestinian ancient literature. It does not exist. There are no great Palestinian leaders throughout the centuries or thousands of years, unlike with the Jews, because they don't exist. In fact, what are called Palestinians today, prior to the 1967 Six Days War, where Israel and Jordan fought among other countries, they used to be called Jordanian Arabs because they had come from Jordan. That whole area of the Middle East was divided up by the victorious Allied powers after World War I, when the Ottoman Empire lost and was defeated because they had sided with Germany. France and England divided the Middle East up between them. The modern states of Iraq were essentially created, as well as a two-partitioned area called Palestine and Israel. The Jews accepted that United Nations partition. Israel was reborn as a nation. The Arabs refused to recognize Israel's rights to exist, which is still true today for most of them. They rejected the partition. And then 5 Arab armies invaded Israel, trying to strangle it in its birth. Had the Palestinians, as they like to call themselves now, because they're revisionists, they are not a distinctive culture nor a separate race. They have never existed, in fact. If they had accepted the original partition in 1948, the lands that would consist or comprise a modern state of Palestine would be far greater than they will ever get now, if and when a peace deal with Israel is ever reached. This is because the Palestinians are saying that Israel must go back to the 1967 borders. They will never do that. Most Jews oppose that because it would leave areas of Israel vulnerable to Hamas rocket attacks, as well as rocket attacks from the Palestinians and the Palestinian National Authority's Fatah units. Parts of Israel would be only about 10 to 12 miles wide if the 1967 borders were observed. The Jews would have to give up Israel. That is not going to be allowed. So with Donald Trump now entering the White House, he has signaled that he would like to see the U.S. Embassy move from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. The Palestinians are using this as an excuse to not engage with Israel in any state negotiations. What's happening before Barack Obama leaves office is that 40 different nations are meeting in Paris to try to find a framework to get the Palestinians and the Israelis back to the peace negotiating table to try to work out a two-state solution. I predict that this will fail for the following reason. It's irrelevant. Mahmoud Abbas has never been a genuine partner for peace. He does not want a single Jew in Palestine. He has said that. He's even reiterated that position very recently. He has praised terrorists. He used to pay them in cash whenever Yasser Arafat told them to. In fact, he's still paying them today, because if you commit a terrorist attack and murder Jews, the Palestinian National Authority will give your family a monthly stipend for doing so. When people behave like this, which is immoral, illegal, wrong, they're not partners for peace. Then there's the issue of the Palestinians themselves. Who speaks for them? If you listen to Palestinians in the Gaza Strip, Hamas, the terrorist group, speaks for them. Hamas is their elected government. Hamas also seized power when they rose up and staged a coup after Arafat died and murdered around 650 Palestinians to seize power from Abbas, drove him out of the area, and he remains confined to the West Bank. So there are two Palestines now, if you will, two Palestinian governments. Hamas claims they speak for the Palestinians in Gaza, where Abbas claims he speaks for them in the West Bank. But there is no single unified spokesman or government or authority for all Palestinians. Therefore, if there ever is a peace agreement reached, the so-called future state of Palestine will probably not be contiguous, and most importantly, the Palestinian leadership and its cadres, this includes the terrorist group Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and these other groups that exist, they will have to give up terrorism, because you can't negotiate with terrorists. You must instead eliminate them. You must address the root causes of hatred and terrorism, and you must get rid of the hate-driven ideologies that breed hatred and glorify death and acts of terrorism. Since the Palestinian National Authority does not do that, they brainwash their children, they teach them to murder Jews, as does Hamas at very early ages, way down to elementary schools, until that kind of thinking, until that kind of immorality, until that kind of hatred, intolerance, and racism no longer exists. It is only then that there is a possibility for a genuine and viable peace. One last piece of information for you. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has said for years now, he's even stood up at the United Nations and has repeated his offer to meet Abbas anywhere, anytime, any place, unconditionally, to restart peace negotiations. What has Abbas's reaction been? Nothing. He refuses to even acknowledge these offers, and it is Abbas who is holding up any potential peace process, not Netanyahu. If the Palestinians don't believe this, they should call Netanyahu's bluff if they think it is a bluff. Return to the negotiating table and see what happens. But they won't do that because they know better.